Have you ever, like, really put your all into something at work? Really gone the extra mile?
Mm-hmm.
Only to watch someone else, usually someone higher up, just kind of sweep in and take all the credit.
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Right. Or maybe you've seen it happen to someone else, a teammate with a brilliant idea that just gets totally ignored by leadership.
Happens all the time.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
And it can really kill team morale. So we wanted to kick off Season 3 of the Systems Thinker Show by diving deep into some of the unspoken rules of the game, you could say.
Right, those power dynamics that are always kind of swirling beneath the surface in any organization.
Exactly. So this whole season is going to be about how Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power can help us understand what really makes teams tick or, totally fall apart.
Because let's be honest, sometimes it feels like there's this whole other set of rules operating in the background that no one talks about.
Totally. And this season, we're bringing those rules into the light so we can learn how to use them to improve team cultures and actually get stuff done.
I love that.
So for this first deep dive, episode 1 of season 3, we're tackling law number 1, never outshine the master.
Ooh, that's a good one. Gets right to the heart of it.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I have to say, when you sent over all the sources for this episode, excerpts from Greene's book, that business case study, even that super interesting Reddit thread.
Oh, yeah. People had a lot to say.
They did. But that first law just jumped out as like, essential. If you want to understand how things really work, you got to understand this one.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about this law is that it's not about being incompetent or hiding your talents.
Yeah.
It's way more subtle than that.
Totally. It's more like strategic humility.
Right. Like you're not dimming your light. You're just, angling it so it reflects well on the people above you.
Exactly. Greene's whole argument, as we see in the book summary you sent, is that to avoid making your superiors feel insecure or resentful, you need to constantly make them feel comfortably superior.
Yeah, like their position is never threatened.
Exactly. You let them take the credit, you support their ideas, you basically build them up as the ultimate authority.
And the book summary you sent was really interesting because it talked about how, if you show off too much, if you're constantly trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room.
You become a threat.
Yeah, you trigger their insecurities, and that's when they might try to hold you back or even sabotage you.
Right, because it becomes about their ego, not about what's best for the team.
Exactly. But if you can make them feel like they're the brilliant ones, like they're the ones calling the shots.
Well, then you create space for yourself to actually operate and get things done.
And that's where the real power comes in.
Right.
Right. Because you're not out there trying to grab the spotlight. You're quietly influencing things from behind the scenes.
It's about being effective, not just being visible.
Which honestly is a lot harder than it sounds.
It is. Because it takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of, honestly, a bit of strategy.
Right. And that's why I think that business case study you found is so helpful. It really shows how this law can play out in a real-world situation.
Oh, for sure. That case study on Enough Tech Solutions is a perfect example of how this stuff actually goes down.
Can you give us a little rundown of the situation there?
So Enough Tech, they're this fast-growing tech company, right? And they've got John Stevens, the CEO, who's like your classic visionary leader, super smart, driven, but also pretty used to getting his way.
I'm sensing some potential for ego clashes here.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely potential. So into this environment walks Sarah Taylor, who's super talented, becomes head of product development.
Setting the stage for drama.
Well, not quite drama, but definitely some tension. As Sarah's got this awesome team coming up with these really innovative ideas, but every time they'd present something, Stevens would kind of absorb it, make it his own.
Classic power move.
It is, and it starts to create this weird dynamic where other executives, even really capable ones, are hesitant to challenge Stevens or present ideas that might deviate from his vision.
It's like he's sucking all the air out of the room.
Exactly. So you've got this situation where Sarah and her team are doing amazing work, but it's all getting credited to Stevens, and other talented people are starting to hold back because they don't want to rock the boat.
So not exactly a recipe for a thriving team culture.
Not at all. But here's where it gets interesting. Sarah, She's clearly read her Robert Greene because she decides to use this whole never outshine the master thing to her advantage.
I love it. So how does she do it? What's her strategy?
She doesn't fight Stevens head on. She gets strategic. Instead of pushing her own agenda directly, she starts framing her team's ideas as like extensions of his vision.
Oh, smart.
Right. And she's super public about praising his leadership, giving him credit for their successes.
Like really playing up the whole mastermind thing.
Exactly. But behind the scenes, she's making sure her team is delivering top-notch results. And she's also quietly building relationships with those other executives, making sure their contributions get recognized, but always in a way that ultimately reinforces Stevens' leadership.
That's such a subtle but powerful move. It's like she's playing 4D chess while everyone else is playing checkers. So what kind of results does she see from this approach?
The case study highlights some really interesting shifts. First of all, Sarah starts to get way more trust and autonomy from Stevens. Because he doesn't see her as a threat, he actually gives her more space to lead her division.
Makes sense. If you're not constantly trying to one-up someone, they're more likely to trust you.
Totally. And then there's this ripple effect across the company. Team morale goes up, not just in Sarah's division, but in other departments too. And people start collaborating more because they're not so focused on competing for Stevens' attention.
That's huge. It's like by taking the focus off of individual power grabs, she creates an environment where everyone can actually work together and, succeed.
Exactly. And the case study also noted that there was way less unproductive office politics going on because, again, people weren't constantly trying to curry favor with the CEO.
It's like she detoxified the whole workplace. So what's the bottom line? What happens to Innovatech?
Innovatech ends up experiencing sustained growth, which the case study directly attributes, at least in part, to Sarah's leadership style and her, strategic application of this never outshine the master principle.
It's proof that this stuff actually works. You can achieve incredible things if you understand the power dynamics at play and learn to work within them.
100%.
So this isn't just some weird theory in an old book.
All right, no, not at all.
You found all sorts of examples of this principle playing out in different industries and leadership styles. What are some of the other insights you found?
One thing that was really interesting was seeing how this principle plays out in more traditional hierarchical industries like manufacturing and engineering.
Which, stereotypically those industries are all about following the chain of command, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in your research, you included a 2019 Manufacturing Institute study, and one of their key findings was that over 70% of workers said that effective leadership had a direct impact on their productivity.
That's a huge number. So leadership really does matter, even in those environments that seem very process-driven.
It does, and what was even more interesting was that the study identified trust and respect as being absolutely crucial for effective leadership.
So it's not just about barking orders.
No. Leaders who make their team members feel secure, who don't make them feel like they're constantly being judged or threatened.
They get the best results.
They do, and that's totally in line with this whole never outshine the master idea. If you're constantly worried about making your boss feel insecure, you're not going to be able to do your best work.
Because you're always going to be holding back. You're never going to want to take risks or put yourself out there.
Right, and what about those fields that are, supposedly more creative and free-flowing?
Right, like economics or marketing.
Exactly. Even in those environments, this principle still applies.
So how does it play out there?
Well, in economics, particularly in places like financial institutions or government agencies, maintaining a balance of power is super important.
Because if one person or group gets too much power,
it can destabilize the whole system.
Totally. And what's interesting is that one of the studies you shared, the one from McKinsey and Company,
yeah, the one about leadership styles and financial performance,
found that organizations with strong leadership alignment, meaning everyone's on the same page and no one feels like they're being shut out, those organizations had much higher revenue growth than organizations where there was a lot of infighting and power struggles.
So even in those high-stakes competitive environments, this idea of creating a sense of security and collaboration at the top,
it translates to better financial performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you look at fields like marketing, services, and even supply chain management, which are all about, working together effectively.
Which honestly, most businesses are about that in some way, right?
Yeah, pretty much. But in those fields, it's even more critical that leaders create a culture where people feel comfortable contributing their ideas without being afraid of getting overshadowed.
Otherwise, you're basically just shutting down innovation and creativity.
Exactly. And you included this really interesting report from the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, and they found that companies with strong collaborative cultures in their supply chains were able to reduce costs by up to 10% and improve efficiency by 12%.
That's huge. So building those collaborative relationships where people feel valued and respected, it actually has a direct impact on the bottom line.
It does. And in the medical field, where you have this strong emphasis on expertise and experience,
Yeah, you're not going to argue with the surgeon when you're on the operating table.
haha, definitely not. But in those environments, it's crucial that junior staff feel supported and mentored by their senior colleagues. It's not just about tradition, it's literally about life and death in some cases.
Yeah, you need that continuity of knowledge and expertise.
Exactly. And, you sent over a really compelling finding from the Journal of Healthcare Leadership, and they found that healthcare organizations with respectful, non-competitive leadership cultures had much higher employee retention rates.
That makes sense. If you feel like you're constantly being undermined or belittled, you're going to look for a job somewhere else.
Exactly. And that turnover is incredibly costly and disruptive, especially in a field like healthcare.
Totally. So while there are tons examples of this law in action across different industries and leadership styles, it's important to remember that it's not always so straightforward.
Right, and this is where things get really interesting.
Because if you take this idea too far, it can start to feel a little
Yeah.
manipulative.
Yeah, like you're just constantly playing this game of making your boss feel good, even if they don't deserve it.
Exactly. And that's where I think that Reddit discussion you shared is so valuable because it brings in some really important counterpoints.
Oh, for sure. That Reddit thread had so many different perspectives on this law, and it was fascinating to see how people were interpreting it.
Yeah, one user was basically saying that the book shouldn't be taken as like a step-by-step guide to career advancement, but more like a warning about the kinds of behaviors you might encounter in the workplace.
Oh, interesting. So, like The Prince by Machiavelli, but for the modern office.
Exactly. Like, it helps you identify when someone might be playing these power games, but it doesn't necessarily mean you should be playing them too.
I like that because it gives you the awareness to protect yourself, but it doesn't turn you into a Machiavellian schemer.
Right. And another really interesting point that came up in that thread was that this law can be really helpful in understanding people who have, let's say, strong personalities.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, like the types of people who always need to be the center of attention, who get really defensive if you challenge them, who always have to be right.
Right. Those people can be really tough to work with, and it's easy to get caught up in their drama.
Totally. But if you can understand that they're operating from this place of insecurity, this need to constantly feel superior.
You can start to navigate those interactions more strategically.
Exactly. And it's not about giving in to them or letting them walk all over you.
It's about understanding their motivations and figuring out how to work within that framework.
Exactly. And one thing I really appreciated about that Reddit thread was that people were acknowledging that Green himself actually presents counter-arguments to his own laws in the book.
Oh, yeah, the reversal sections. That's one of the things that makes his work so interesting. He's not just presenting these laws as like absolute truths.
Right. He's acknowledging that they're complex and that there are situations where they might not apply. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially with this first law.
Totally. Because if you just blindly follow the idea of never outshine the master, you might end up doing yourself a disservice.
Right. You could end up suppressing your own talents and ideas, and that's not good for anyone.
And it's not what Green is advocating for. He's more about using these laws as a lens through which to understand human behavior.
To see the world more clearly.
Exactly. And there was also some really interesting discussion in the Reddit thread about some of the criticisms that have been leveled at Green's work.
Yeah, like the Wikipedia entry you shared pointed out that some critics have accused him of cherry-picking his historical examples to support his arguments.
And omitting important context.
Yeah, which makes it seem like these laws are more universally applicable than they actually might be.
It's a fair criticism, because history is messy, and human behavior is even messier.
Totally. And the Wikipedia entry also mentioned that some critics have even argued that the whole point of the 48 Laws of Power is actually to encourage humility.
Which is kind of a wild take when you consider the title of the book.
Right. But I think there's something to that idea, because if you really understand these laws, if you really understand how power dynamics work,
You realize that sometimes the most powerful move is to step back.
to not be so focused on your own ego, not be so concerned with being the one in the spotlight,
And instead focus on creating the conditions for everyone to succeed.
which ultimately benefits you too.
Exactly.
So bringing this back to our focus this season, how can all of this whole deep dive into never outshine the master, help us improve team cultures?
I think the key takeaway here is awareness. For individuals, understanding that their actions can unintentionally trigger insecurity in their superiors, it can be a game changer.
It's like having this secret decoder ring for workplace dynamics.
Right, and it allows them to navigate those dynamics more effectively. They can learn to frame their contributions in a way that acknowledges and supports the leadership's vision without sacrificing their own ideas.
Like we saw with Sarah at InnovTech.
Exactly. And for leaders, understanding this principle can help them avoid inadvertently stifling their team's growth by creating a hyper-competitive or insecure environment.
Which is so important because, as we've seen, that kind of environment can lead to all sorts of negative consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, never outshine the master is more than just a catchy phrase. When you really understand it, it can be a powerful tool for building stronger, more collaborative, and ultimately more successful teams.
Teams where everyone feels valued and respected, and everyone is working towards a common goal.
Exactly.
This has been an amazing deep dive into Robert Greene's first law. We've explored the core principles, seen it in action, and considered all sorts of different perspectives.
It's been really enlightening.
It has. So as you, our listeners, are thinking about all this, we'd love for you to consider this question. How might understanding this law of power, never outshine the master, shift the way you collaborate with your team and interact with leadership? How has it maybe already played out in your own workplace experiences? We encourage you to dig into the 48 laws of power from those sources we shared and think about how these ideas, when approached thoughtfully, can provide incredible insights into team dynamics. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please reach out to us at www.karaswisher.com. And a huge thank you to our executive producer and founder, Lanier Johnson.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lanier.
Until next time.